Can I check my presentation? Hello, is anyone there?
Yes, yes, of course. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Is my screen visible? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
Yes, it works perfectly. Looks nice.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Does anybody know who is the convener? I think he or she is not present yet, but who might that be?
Hello. He is Beric. Our convener is Beric from Hamad bin Khalifa University, but he's not yet here.
Eric. Anis Ben Brick.
Brick.
All right.
Anis Ben Brick.
Yeah, he was in the same session this morning, but we are trying to get to him and ask him to please arrive as soon as possible. And I'm asking what shall we do if he doesn't appear. I guess we should start without him, but let's wait a few minutes still, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, we are missing the convener, and we are also missing the first paper presenter, Ido Olege, unless somebody is supposed to present instead of him or her. So why not we go to the impact of social protection and digital culture on women's well-being by Hania Shabir, Faria Hashmat, Ahmad Nawaz, and Hafiz Hazir Ahmad. Is this correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Thanks a lot. Hello, good evening, everybody. I'm here to talk on the impact of social protection and digital culture on women's well-being, new evidence from multiple indicator cluster survey, Punjab, Pakistan. Dr. Ahmed Nawaz, Faria, and Haris have helped me to do this research. First of all, I'll introduce my topic. Can you all hear me?
Yes, you
Okay.
are heard.
First of all, I'll introduce my topic and briefly discuss my research questions, and then I'll be going towards my literature review, just giving a glimpse of it, and then I'll be discussing my methodology, and then I'll be doing my discussion and analysis of results, and then I'll be suggesting policies. So first of all, I want to introduce my country, which is where I have conducted the research. Pakistan is world's 5th most populous country and 2nd largest South Asian most populous country with the population of 223 million. And with this huge population, there lies the status of women, which varies along the different regions and classes, basically due to the presence of formal and informal institutions, such as tribal institutions and feudal institutions. So these all institutions make Pakistan a patriarchal society where women are bound by age-old traditions, and they most often observe the role of a subservient, mostly dominated by men, of course. And then according to recent global gender gap, we get to see that Pakistan is ranked at 153rd position among 156 countries, which is a stark reminder of the fact that women in Pakistan are marginalized and they are way behind men. So when we all are stuck with COVID-19, we see that our world has faced major economic downturn, and it has negatively affected the um, marginalized communities, especially. So the gender inequalities, which already prevailed in Pakistan, got even more worse after the advent of COVID-19. The women who were working in informal markets were basically not paid well, and then due to lockdown, they lost all their jobs. Their well-being was affected. So there was dire need of research on what can be done with these women so that they can be empowered. This is one of the pictures in which we can see that in the lockdown, these women are standing to receive their social protection programs money, and they are not following any SOPs because they are already so marginalized. They do not care about anything. They just care that they should be given such amount of money so that they can meet their basic necessities. So in this backdrop, I am basically looking at the subjective well-being of women and the material well-being of women, and how information communication technology is playing role in it, and how social protection is increasing or decreasing the material and subjective well-being of women. Subjective well-being is basically defined as the perceptions of one's own life, how one perceives one's life. And material well-being is obviously associated with the economic well-being, the well score of our women. In recent years, we get to see that a lot of development has taken place in various of the areas, such as flow of information, communication, goods and services, the interconnectivity, everything has evolved so beautifully. But all these things, the impact of all these things is not well researched in the case of women. So I'm basically looking at how ICT is making women empowered. ICT obviously has the strength to cross the barriers of illiteracy. It has the power to change the social structure and to make a lot of networks and do a lot in terms of development. So this is just a glimpse that in 223 million, 37.3% of the people are urbanized. In Pakistan, and 77.7% population is having mobile connections, which means a lot of population is having mobile connections. Internet is used by 27.5% population, and 46 million population is on active social media. So these are my research objectives, and my research questions are that I am looking at how the institutional arrangements such as social security, cash donation, remittances, health insurance, they significantly determine women's subjective well-being, and to what extent access to ICT related technology determines subjective and material well-being of women. This is my conceptual framework, which is adopted by Castelli 2013. And he states that ICT is having a profound effect on all these domains mentioned here as personal characteristics, external environment, work life, and private life. So all these lives are affected by ICT, which on the other hand affect the subjective well-being of a person. I, in my model, have included here material well-being as well, and I'm specifically looking at the social, institutional environment and the personal characteristics, how they are affecting the subjective well-being and material well-being. These are some of the theories which underpin my research. Most important of them is the capability approach, because according to Sent, health and education are essential for making women capable of achieving their optimum potential. Whereas to me, I believe that ICT is also one of the basic necessities which can empower women to achieve their all capabilities and to unleash their capabilities. This is the literature review. I'm just giving a glimpse of it. In Pakistan, the demographics review suggests that age has negative association with life satisfaction of women's subjective well-being, and apart from that, income is positively associated, education is positively associated, and income is positively associated with the subjective well-being. Whereas the cash donations in various of the cities have positive impact. In some of the cities, it has negative impact. Like in Indonesia, we get to see that it has no impact on improving the subjective well-being of people. Whereas in some of the cases in Pakistan, it has found to have a positive impact. So there are mixed results. Remittances again have mixed results. In China, they have positive impact, but in Nepal, they do not have a positive impact on the well-being of people. So when we get to see the literature about ICT, we also see mixed results, because Lohman suggested that watching television for hours decreases the life satisfaction of people, whereas some of the researchers suggested that it has positive impact and it can empower people differently in terms of in their education, healthcare, media. So it also has mixed results. So the gap which I'm trying to fill is that none of the research is specifically focused to women. And due to the higher failure rate of ICT interventions, because there was limited focus on well-being, I am trying to associate and find the association between these two variables, because ICT, its impact varies along different cultures, institutions, and the class and gender. It also plays vital role. So we have to see that in context of developing country like Pakistan, how does ICT and the institutional variables such as social protection and remittances play their role? This is my framework in which my independent variables would be remittances, social security, cash donation, social security awareness, health insurance, bank account. And then I'll be looking at the ICT variables in which I've made an index of newspaper, radio, and television in the information. Under the information category and under the communication category, I have made an index of computer usage, internet usage, and mobile usage. And then for technology, I'm using how skilled women are when it comes to technology. My control variables would be age, education, health, marital status, and wealth score. Whereas my dependent variables would be subjective. For subjective well-being, I'm basically looking at life satisfaction, which is measured from 0 to 10 on the scale of 0 to 10. And then for material well-being, I'm looking at their wealth scores. This is basically my methodology. I'm using MICS 2017-18 data set in which 74,000, almost 74,000 women were interviewed and 51,000 households were interviewed. So I am basically looking at the women aged between 15 and 49. And they are both from the rural areas and the urban areas as well. I have used OLS regression to see the significance of my variables. YZ denotes to the life satisfaction of women, the subjective well-being, and YW pertains to the wealth score of women. Rest are these are my institutional variables. These are my personal characteristics of women. These are my institutional variables, and these are my variables for ICT. This is the T-table analysis in which basically I get to see that the households which do receive cash donation have less subjective well-being and less wealth score as compared to those households which do not receive cash donations. Similarly, the case for social assistance is the same. And for the remittances, we get to see that the households which do not receive remittances have lower subjective well-being and wealth score as compared to the ones who are receiving remittances. In this picture, you can see clearly that the ones using ICT have better health scores. This one's positive, so they have better health score and wealth score, and their material well-being of the ones having remittances is also higher. But the ones who are taking social assistance, they have negative wealth score. So wealth score in this case is negatively affected by the presence of social security and cash donation. This is my regression equation in which one can see that remittances, when a woman is not having remittances, then it has negative impact on the life satisfaction of that woman. And when a woman is receiving cash donation, it is having, when a woman is not receiving cash donation, because it is no, then it is having a positive impact, which means that having a cash donation has a negative impact on a woman. These all variables are highly significant, whereas social security awareness variable is insignificant, social assistance variable is insignificant, then having a bank account is also significant. And when a woman is not having a bank account, it has a negative impact on her life satisfaction. Same is the case with health insurance, whereas we get to see that the higher the wealth score, higher will be the life satisfaction of a woman. Higher the education, higher the life satisfaction of a woman. And as compared to the married woman, formerly married woman and never married woman have less life satisfaction. When in my equation 2, I'm adding the variable of information, we get to see that it is highly significant and positively affecting the life satisfaction of women. And when we add the communication variable in my third equation, we see that it is insignificant. And the ICT skills, when it is added, it has negative impact on the life satisfaction of women. So let's discuss these results a bit. The findings of my control variables is consistent with the findings of Banchflower and Oswald, Ali and Huck, which states that there's positive relationship between self-related life satisfaction and education, and it has positive impact. It has positive association with the income as well. And financial satisfaction is very strongly associated with life satisfaction. So it means the better economically sustained you are, the better your life satisfaction would be. Woman age has negative impact on her life satisfaction, and as the age increases, her life satisfaction decreases. These are consistent with the findings of Vera et al. And Blanchard as well. Now we get to see that the results for marriage are also consistent with the finding of Bennett KM, and the results for cash donation are consistent with the study of Cardens et al., Ake et al. Whereas for remittances, we get to see that LFs also found that remittances are positively associated with life satisfaction of people, which is also there in my study. Social security program sometimes has a negative impact, and sometimes it has positive impact. But in my study, it was proven that it has negative impact on the life satisfaction of women. And this is against the studies which postulate that the income of poor household is increased and their subjective well-being is increased after getting social security. But in my case, it has not proven. So also health insurance is a variable which is possibly linked with subjective well-being of people, and this is also consistent with this study. So when we take a look at the information variable, we see that it is highly significant, and which is contradictory to the finding of Lohmann, who suggested that it has negative impact on the life satisfaction of people, whereas in my case, it has a positive impact. Then communication variable in our case is insignificant, whereas in many of the studies, it postulates that communication in terms of internet and mobile, it provides higher subjective well-being. ICT skills in my equation is negatively associated. Now, this has to be understood clearly because the GSMA report also states that when people gain access to new technologies, economic change or development induces frustration because societies take time in disruption of existing processes and overcoming challenges. So in Pakistan, in the case of Pakistan, cultural lag exists as the material culture and the change in ICTs, it has moved forward. But we get to see that the informal culture, it is still there. Women still face a lot of patriarchal issues. They still face hindrances to unleash their true potential. That is why they have a little frustration, which is there, which we can observe in the case of negative association between ICT skills and life satisfaction. In this regression, I'm basically looking at the well score, and it states that when a woman is not receiving remittances, her well score is lower. When she's not receiving cash donation, her well score is higher. And social security awareness, again, here is insignificant. Social assistance is significant, but is negative, which means that having a social assistance program leads to lower well score of a woman. Having a bank account increases her well score, and having education increases her well score. As her age increases, her well score increases, as compared to the married woman. Formerly married women and never married women have less well score. And in my second equation, when I add the variable of information, I see that it is highly significant, and it contributes positively towards the well score. Communication here again is highly positive, which was not positive in the case of life satisfaction, but here is positive and highly significant. ICT skills is also positive and highly significant. We also get to see that with the advent of the information variable, this variable, when it is added in the equation, we see that the social security awareness has become a highly significant, which means that in the presence of information, the social security awareness has also increased among people. So the current study found that negative association lies between the social security and material well-being. These findings are also consistent with the findings of Said et al., but against the findings of the Malwai Social Cash Transfer Program. Remittances, in my case, are consistent with the findings of Gratula, and information communication technology, all the variables are highly significant at 0.01 p. we get to see that the impact of internet technologies on different aspects of development. And because of that, it is highly contributing towards the wealth score of women. Internet has the potential to improve growth and to reduce disparities by increasing productivity, increasing markets, improving markets, strengthening human capital, social capital, and it allows women to unleash everything in several of the terms. The material well-being, as discussed by Shah, 2020, he states that it helps women to find more informal e-commerce, and it has been a path to financial inclusion and economic independence of women. Like, I would also like to suggest here that I'm moving towards my suggestions now, that in the post-COVID times, we need to lessen the burden on the economies of those developing countries who are already burdened. So we need to move away from social security programs. I know that this is very important, that we should be providing them with social security, but we should be enabling them to earn their own money, even in the times of lockdown. So what I suggest is that ICT interventions should be there, because they help women form value chains. They help women to build up resilience. They make women more innovative. They are more convenient for women because they're easy to use, and they can have their own timings to sell and to purchase things, and they can no employees are needed. They can have minimal investments in it, and then they can have a lot to harvest from the ICT. So it would also reduce pressures on government in the post-COVID times. Also, we get to see that television was very important in making the awareness variable significant. So ICT can also be used to create awareness about the COVID-19 and their health and hygiene. And it can also increase awareness about the preventive measures. So ICT in my current study is a very influential variable which can transform the lives of women, especially the rural women. Moreover, when concluding my remarks on the social security, I think we need to have more studies, micro studies, which should see the efficacy of the social security programs and cash nations, because in the data set of MICS, it was not very effective. Thanks a lot. I welcome all your questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Is there any questions from anybody at this point? Or comments? Okay, I put in a chat that the first speaker that was supposed to start this, Irovu Oleke, is unable to attend today. So we have to move on, and then going to the subject of rethinking social protection for vulnerable youth in Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Lebanon in the context of COVID-19. And I forward the speaking to Kate Pinkong, Nicola Jones, Sylvia Guglielmi, Bogne Jedete, and Sally Youssef. Okay, now we're seeing somebody's Gmail inbox. Maybe you should stop sharing and try all over again to get the right presentation showing.
I'm so sorry I couldn't share the slide. I don't know, Sally, can you try if you can share and then manage it?
Yes, sure. Moment.
So, yeah, sorry for that.
Can you stop sharing your screen, please, Workney? Sorry.
Okay, just I enabled to be able to share even if someone else is sharing. So you can, Sally, you can start sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm working at the theater from Ethiopia, and I think Sally will present our findings. I will start with introduction and also present on the Ethiopian section, and Sally will present on the Lebanon and the conclusion part. I'm so sorry that Bangladesh is not there, just was an excuse for that. So next slide, Sally. Yeah, just to give some highlights on what the literature says in relation to social protection during the COVID-19 pandemic. It said that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated existing social inequalities, especially in the contexts of fragility and displacement, where people are more vulnerable to contracting the virus, especially due to poverty, inadequate health services, lack of social, political, and economic capital. Some literature also suggests that young people, especially youth migrants and the refugees, are vulnerable to the pandemic due to school closures, loss of employment opportunities, and social isolation. And some studies from the UN also emphasized about the need to expand social protection schemes and to ensure basic services for all people in line with the Sustainable Development Goal 1. So the objective of this study is specifically to explore the impact of COVID-19 on displaced and migrant young people in the study countries, which is drawing on a mixed method research of the Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence Gauge program, which is actually doing research in 6 countries, but here specifically we focus on Ethiopia and Lebanon. The specific, when we look at the COVID-19 cases starting from the onset of COVID-19 in February last year, 2020 last year, until today, as you see in both countries, the case has been increasing. However, in both countries, the number of confirmed cases is lower than the number of actual cases, especially because of the limited testing, particularly in Ethiopia, for example, in rural areas, because of the absence of hospitals and other health institutions. Testing is mainly carried out in big urban areas. So it is very difficult to really know the cases in remote rural areas and pastoralist communities. Next slide. Again, in relation to the COVID-19 disease, our finding, specifically the literature shows that the number of disease has been increasing since the onset of the pandemic, and only it seems that recently that started to go down. However, still because of limited testing, as well as because of challenging in attribution on the cause of disease, means that the number of confirmed disease in both countries may not be accurate count of the true number of disease. Because there are a number of challenges. Specifically, the testing issue is a major problem. Next slide. As I said, the Gender and Adolescence Global Evidence Program, GAGE, has been working in 6 countries and for 9 years, focusing on adolescence and the gender. But this specific ones is focusing on Ethiopia and Lebanon. Particularly in Lebanon, the focus is on Syria and Palestine refugee population. In Ethiopia, we have conducted a quantitative survey with around 2,058 urban adolescents, and we also conducted virtual qualitative interviews with individual adolescents from urban areas, around 189. And also key informant with interviews with service providers, both at the community and the district level. In Lebanon, we conducted virtual individual and FGD interviews with 47 refugee adolescents, specifically from Palestine and the Syria refugee campus, and 16 Lebanese adolescents who are from the host communities, and at the same time, we conduct some key informant interviews with service providers. Next slide. The conceptual framework that we use is called the GAGE 3Cs, which includes capability, outcomes, which tries to look at adolescents' capabilities in relation to education and learning, health, nutrition, and SRH, bodily integrity, psychosocial well-being, voice and agency, and economic empowerment. And the second C is contexts that shape adolescent girls and the boys' capabilities, in which we try to look at individual adolescents at the center and then connect them within the household, community, national and international contexts. And we also try to look at the change pathways that helps us to look at the important interventions that can help adolescents transition. Next slide. So let me go to the key findings in relation to the social protection issues in Ethiopia. For example, in relation to the impacts of social protection on nutrition and the food insecurity, our finding clearly shows that around 13% of adolescents said that they have been being hungry at least once in past 4 weeks, and this had increased specifically due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Boys' hunger rates seems to be higher than those of girls, and married girls, however, were twice as likely to report hunger than unmarried peers. Hunger was a strong concern, specifically for migrant adolescents in urban areas, where many of them reported having engaged in begging, eating leftover foods from restaurants and hotels, and also sometimes they are forced to reduce their daily meals. For example, from 3 into 2, or sometimes eat only once. Next slide. When we look at the impacts on education, around 86% of adolescents in the study reported doing something to continue their learning during the school closure related to the pandemic. However, this was mainly self-study, such as looking at textbooks, but it is not a well-organized kind of remote learning. Only about 8% of adolescents in the study reported accessing the Ministry of Education's radio and the TV distance education program. This is particularly because of the fact that most of the adolescents in the rural areas have limited access to digital devices as well as internet technologies. At the same time, family pressure to do paid work and the domestic work and the care have impacted on their time for education, so that they had very limited time even to continue with the radio or TV program. Next slide. In relation to its impact on livelihoods, around 45% of all adolescents reported that someone in the household had lost employment during the pandemic. 70% of them reported the household had lost some kind of income. 64% of them worried about not able to meet their daily household needs. So that is a big worry among young people. And many migrants and domestic workers have lost their employment during the period of the pandemic, and they were forced to resort to begging and commercial sex work, which is really in some cases very devastating. When we look at briefly at the social protection program in Ethiopia, the productive safety net program is actually among the biggest social protection scheme in sub-Saharan Africa, and it was started in rural areas in 2005 with mainly a focus on poorer rural households, and it combines both cash and food assistance in exchange for participation in public work schemes, such as, for example, engaging in road construction, a sanitation system, environmental protection and restoration, and extra. And around 2017, the productive safety net program was expanded into the urban areas and still again targeting the urban population. So far in rural areas, around 8 million households have been targeted, and around 800,000 households were targeted in urban areas. But this number is so limited in terms of coverage because in Ethiopia, particularly in rural areas, around 21 million households are still classified as food insecure. So as compared with the number of needy population, the already targeted beneficiaries seems to be small. In urban areas, for example, only 2.5% of the population are targeted. And specifically in urban areas, even though the social protection policy said that it also includes vulnerable population, such as people with disabilities, those who are living on the street, and the commercial sex workers, but in practice, there is a big challenge. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so when we look at the urban context only, the target is very small, 2%. There is lack of awareness about their right to claim social assistance, particularly among young population who are working on the streets, living on the street, and sex workers. So awareness raising is so poor, and many of them lack residence identity card, because that is, again, a requirement, particularly in urban areas, so that they cannot fit to the eligibility criteria. So our findings also show that the importance of social protection for adolescents with disability is so critical, but still they are not well targeted, and the program is not disability responsive program at all. And the street-connected adolescents and the young people, particularly those involved in commercial sex work, have been facing risks due to lack of social protection. Sometimes in some areas, they are forced to negotiate, for example, on the use of condom uses, because they lack money, so that they prefer to accept everything what their customers ask them to do to get money. And finally, there are also some major concerns related to the political violence in the country, which may be considered as may divert the focus of the government and NGOs from the pandemic into the political situation. I think these are briefly our findings. I think Sally will continue on the Lebanon one. Thank you.
Thank you, Wortney. Hello, everyone. I hope you're hearing me well. So moving to the impacts in Lebanon, as the pandemic in Lebanon coincided with severe economic crisis and hyperinflation, food insecurity and decreasing quality and variety of food was one of the major impacts reported by the adolescents in our sample of different host and the already struggling refugee communities, with some families being unable to afford any food for several days in the month, besides affording any other basic needs as well. Which in turn actually resulted in increasing tensions within the households, which is negatively affecting the adolescent's psychosocial well-being. Okay, it's not moving. Okay. So another major impact of the pandemic was on the adolescents' education. So education in Lebanon was already interrupted prior to the pandemic due to socio-political crisis in the country. With the pandemic, the schools shifted to online education, and although the Ministry of Education broadcasted lessons for specific levels on the TV, however, each of the schools, either public or private, were following their own online methods. Many challenges with online education were discussed by the participants, including the lack of access to devices, particularly refugee adolescents, and the interruptions in electricity and internet services, which are becoming severe with time currently in Lebanon. This, in addition to lack of support from teachers and students' inability to keep up with online lessons, or even dealing with online technologies as well. So moving to the impact of the pandemic on livelihood. So prior to the pandemic, actually, and due to the economic crisis, households in Lebanon were facing decrease. Because my internet is showing it's interrupting. Hello?
Hello.
Sorry, just making sure you're hearing me.
Just a little bit problem with your voice before, but now sounds good again.
Okay, sorry, weak internet connection.
It's okay, just go on.
All right, thanks. Okay, so I was saying that Prior to the pandemic and due to the economic crisis in the country, many households in Lebanon were facing a decrease in their income and even loss of income and jobs. When the pandemic started, it accelerated the economic freefall in the country, which resulted in large-scale loss of income, especially for daily workers during the lockdowns. This, in addition to the hyperinflation that we're currently facing, which resulted in households' inability to afford the protective measures against COVID and any other basic needs. So although the refugee adolescents were affected the most during the lockdowns, especially working adolescents, now with the accelerating crisis, Lebanese adolescents are also increasingly struggling with the deteriorating situation. This economic stress on both the host and refugee communities is resulting also in increasing tensions between host and refugee communities in Lebanon, especially with the Syrian refugees, which is also adding to the refugee adolescents' challenges, especially boys who are the main ones interacting with the host communities. So moving to the social protection programs in Lebanon. So Lebanon's social protection services are generally weak, fragmented, and have limited reach. So there are three main social security programs run by the state. To start with the NSSF, which targets workers in formal employment and covers less than half of the Lebanese working force due to both large scale of informal market in the country and high employer contributions to this fund. Although refugees are eligible to be covered by the NSSF, Palestinians do not enjoy health benefits, and Syrians became ineligible after the refugee crisis. In fact, and in practice, refugees are largely uncovered by the NSSF in Lebanon. The second program is the National Poverty Targeting Program that targets the most vulnerable households in Lebanon, providing food, health, and education assistance. However, it has a very limited reach and lack transparency with the criteria and selection of these households. This program still relies on outdated data on poverty in Lebanon and covers only 4.5% of the Lebanese national, while the World Bank, for example, estimates indicated at the beginning of the pandemic that half of the population was living in poverty, and current estimates are indicating that over 70% of the population is living under the poverty line. And finally, the PEP, which aims at economically empowering vulnerable populations in Lebanon. It targets mainly Syrian refugees and funds cash for work programs implemented through NGOs. There is little data on these programs, and they are largely known to be unmonitored. So moving to refugees, refugees social protection services are mainly supplied by UN agencies in Lebanon, and these have limited reach as well. So the Palestinian in Lebanon completely rely on UNRWA services and are excluded from public services like healthcare, for example. UNRWA runs a relief and social services program that reaches a limited number of Palestinians, and provisions have been declining over the years due to lack of funding. As for the Syrian refugees, they benefit from two social protection streams: the food assistance program run by WFP, which covers 40% of the poorest households of the Lebanese and Syrian populations, which are mainly those living under extreme poverty. And there is the multi-purpose cash assistance run by UNHCR and WFP that covers only 20% of the poorest Syrian households. Following the pandemic, the formal social protection response was weak in Lebanon. The Lebanese government's response was weak and almost absent, leaving the vulnerable Lebanese dependent on the support from the NGOs, either local or international. And these were mainly one-time in-kind assistance. The UN, as for the refugees, the UNHCR and the UNRWA increased their programming scale during or after the pandemic. However, with the hyperinflation in the country, even the households benefiting from these programs are still struggling to afford basic needs. And the reach of these programs are still very limited compared to the massive increase in the poverty levels, especially among refugee populations, and especially since the beginning of this year. And finally, I will end with some recommendations on adolescent responsive social assistance policy and programming. So first, based on our findings, there's a clear urgent need to ensure that social protection responses are informed on adolescent-specific age and gender needs. Second, there is a need also to upscale the basic food assistance programming to support vulnerable populations, especially with the increasing food insecurity during the pandemic. Third, there is a need to connect social protection services to referral mechanisms of different psychosocial protection services and to strengthen the latter due to the intersection of economic and social vulnerabilities that our findings highlight during COVID-19. And finally, there is a substantial need for further research to understand the longer-term impact of the gaps in the protection systems during the pandemic. So that was it. Thank you. And we welcome any questions or comments that you might have. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So does anyone have any questions or comments for us?
Hello, Sally, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about this organization of yours, Gauge. It is written over here that it is UK. It is supported by UK. So, did you discuss any of the social security arrangements done by this organization in Lebanon or in Ethiopia?
Generally, yes. Actually, we work with different actors in the countries where the program is implemented. Usually we work on the local levels with the service providers, local organizations, as well as with, in some places with municipalities and any local actors providing services or programs to specifically to adolescents. And youth as well. We also work with the governments at the national level to work on enhancing the policies in each of the countries that we work on in.
Okay. So you were the direct stakeholders of.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? We are missing the last speaker also. So if there are no comments or questions today anymore, we'll wrap this up and then hopefully see each other tomorrow. There will be more interesting papers to come, and hopefully we'll have the convener attend the sessions as well. Thanks for being here, and see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.